movie fans. In my last video, I did the top 5 worst Marvel movies of all time, proving that even a company like Marvel can still have some misses along the way. If you would like to see that video, click right here. To be fair to the other half of the comic book world, today I will be counting down the top 5 worst DC movies as opposed to the Marvel movies. On this list, you will see some names besides the classic characters that you know, like Batman and Superman. Yes, they've had some bad movies, but there are other bad movies that also fall under the DC banner. Now that we've gotten that clarification out of the way, our number 5 for worst DC movie is League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or the League of Meh Dudes Just Hanging Around, because there really wasn't anything spectacular about them or the movie itself. The only thing that this film is really known for nowadays is being the last movie that Sean Connery has appeared in. So please, James Bond, come out of retirement one last time to do anything but this. This was a really poor outing and a really bad last note to go out on, considering how great he is. Very poor movie, poorly directed, poorly acted, nothing made sense. But as bad as this movie is, there are plenty worse to come. At number 4, we have Steel. Now, who is Steel? Steel is kind of DC's version of Iron Man. It is a billionaire weapons arms maker who, after seeing a traumatic event, stops making weapons and builds a giant iron suit. It is very much Iron Man. The difference between Iron Man and Steel is that Iron Man is played by Academy Award nominee Robert Downey Jr., and Steel is played by Mr. Gold Bond himself, Shaquille O'Neal. Yeah, Shaq as a superhero. The problem is his costume is so laughably bad, and because he was so big, he was still playing in the NBA. This is back in his Lakers prime, so he was very limited in what he could actually do. Plus, he can't act to save his life. I'm sorry, Shaq. Don't step on me. But this movie's so poorly acted. It's a terrible movie. Don't ever see it. It's bad, but there's far worse. Which brings us to our number 3 movie. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Now, the cinematic life of Superman has definitely had its ups and downs, with, in arguably my mind, the highest point being Superman 2 of the originals, and the lowest point being Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Now, Quest for Peace was the last movie with the original Superman, Christopher Reeves. He actually helped write the script and I believe was one of the producers for this film. But he probably wants no involvement after this movie. It was terrible. The budget was slashed big time, so if you watch carefully, any scene with Superman flying is the same shot over and over again with a different background because it didn't have the money. Plus, Nuclear Man was the bad guy, and he was created from a hair from Superman that got thrown into a nuclear reactor. Yeah. Don't understand it? Neither do I. If your most notable line in a movie is, "If you do not stop, I will hurt people," in that exact tone of voice and in that pronunciation, it's awful. Plus, for some reason, the Man of Steel himself has an assortment of grab bag of powers that Superman doesn't actually have, like rebuilding the Great Wall of China with his eyes, or lowering people that fall from the sky telepathically. At number 2, we have Catwoman. This movie has little to nothing to do with the Catwoman character in the Batman comics, but it still, unfortunately, falls under the DC banner. Halle Berry, coming off an Academy Award, is playing Catwoman in this movie, but nothing about this movie makes sense. Once again, it's people that have not read the comics making a Catwoman movie, and she's got all this weird abilities that Catwoman doesn't really have, and she's very awkward. Plus, some of the lines are just utterly ridiculous and goofy. The action is terrible. They relied too much on Halle Berry in a costume and not so much on characters, which created for a very, very unfortunate and terrible film. I'd much rather have Eartha Kitt in the 1960s Batman as Catwoman than that. And like I did with my Marvel video, here are some dishonorable mentions. We have Jonah Hex, which, according to IMDb, is actually DC's lowest rated film, but given that I have not seen it, it didn't go on my top 5. But Megan Fox is in it, how good can it be? BAM! We also have Supergirl and Green Lantern. Now, I actually will defend Green Lantern. I won't defend it as a great movie, but I will defend it as better than people thought. That being said, it's still not a good movie. Ryan Reynolds, though, it's not your fault. Hopefully you can do better as Deadpool, now that you finally have a movie. So, what is the worst DC movie, and arguably in my mind, one of the worst movies ever made? That is easy. Batman and Robin, or as I like to call it, franchise killer. Before this movie, superheroes had come along and were doing fairly well. We had the original Superman, we had Superman 2, which was arguably better than the first one. We had the Michael Keaton Batman show that we can go from awesome and heroic to dark and brooding, but more serious in tone. Joel Schumacher was trying to recreate the 1960s cheesy, campy Batman that everyone loved back then into the modern day. But the problem was people got so acclimated to this dark and brooding, mysterious Batman that everything came off very hokey and cheesy in this Batman and Robin film. Plus, the film had a budget of $123 million. The movie itself is 122 minutes. Think about it. That's $1 million a minute. Now, you say Movie Guy 17. There's movies like Avatar and other big blockbusters that have a bigger budget than the runtimes. Yes, but those have extravagant set pieces and rely on a lot of CGI. Yes, this has a lot of extravagant set pieces, but they look like Heffalump and Woozle's nightmares from Winnie the Pooh. Yeah, they're groovy and psychedelic, and it doesn't really fit in a Batman world. Another big selling point for why this movie was so bad is that it was rushed into production very, very quickly. In all the DVD commentaries and whatnot, the cast, they didn't lie. The toys were made before the movie, and they weren't completely sold about this movie because it was rushed into production, and they had to meet a certain deadline. Plus, there were some horrible miscastings. George Clooney was arguably just the worst Batman we've ever seen. Arnold Schwarzenegger, as much as I love him, and he had his heyday back in the 80s, I would make the case this one was one of the ones that started his downward trend in his career. Yes, the movie has a 122-minute runtime. It probably has 200 ice puns as Mr. Freeze. For the sake of keeping the show appropriate, I won't even talk about the costumes changes that they made. This whole movie is just a terrible, terrible disaster. And in my mind, it ended the first wave of superhero movies. That's why we owe the original Spider-Man trilogy and the original X-Men trilogy our gratitude, because without them reestablishing in people's minds that superhero movies could be good, we would not have superhero movies like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or even the Nolan trilogy. Because of Batman and Robin's damage to the genre, it was so bad. Enough negativity for one day. Next week, I will be looking at the top 5 best Marvel movies and the top 5 best DC movies. What do you guys think? Do you agree with what I have to say? Did you actually enjoy these movies? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, go to facebook.com/movieguy17 or Twitter at nmovieguy17. Stay sharp, movie guys and gals.